Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Thank you so very much for joining me this evening, wherever you are. And I send you loads of love and I hope you're keeping nice and warm, especially if you're feeling the cold out there. And don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa because there's no better way to start a cold day with a story and also to go to bed on a lovely story. So I've got a lovely story lined up for you tonight that you're really going to love. And if you're looking for any Christmas story, Christmas present ideas, well, look no further than the Saroy Sasquatch shirt, which you're just going to love. I just love it. I think it's because it's just so, I love the name Saroy. It just looks so lovely. And I also love the fact that it's just such a lovely t-shirt. It says Sasquatch are real, oh yes. And it's just amazing. It's just stunning to look at. So think about it if you want to give somebody a nice present, perhaps somebody who loves Bigfoot as much as you do. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Sheila and I'm from Washington State, where I work as a hairdresser. Since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, there is nothing that I was more desirous to do than people's hair. My father remembers that even when I was only 8 years old, I would stand on a little stool behind the back of a leather chair he was sitting on, and while he was reading a book, I would play with his locks of inky black hair. My father enjoyed me tweaking, pulling and twirling his hair because it was rather like experiencing a pleasant, rather invigorating head massage. I'd play with my sister Alice's hair as well, virtually all the time, and I would spend ages braiding it and creating all kinds of rather fetching hairstyles which she absolutely loved. Alice had long blonde, very pretty hair, and one day when she was sleeping upright in the chair, I couldn't resist cutting her hair really short, as I had this exciting kinky hairstyle in mind for her that I knew would be extremely becoming and fetching on her Aubrey Hepburn-like face. She let out the most horrified scream and ran to the mirror crying, "Look what you've done! Oh my word! I look exactly like a boy! I look like a boy! What have you done?" she screamed. "What have you done? How could you do this to me?" I've never seen my sister more distraught because she'd lost all her gorgeous blonde locks. My sister really believed that I'd done it out of deliberate spite, but nothing could have been further from the truth. I just invariably got carried away with a rather creative, inspirational idea in my mind that I wanted to pursue, without actually thinking about the consequences. Ask any artist what that inspirational urge is like. It sort of takes over you. Even if I say so myself, I have to tell you that my sister looked remarkably cute with her hair short. It was not long before she was being inundated by compliments about her funky hairstyle, and even her friends were begging me for haircuts so that I could make them look just like my sister. Ironically, all these years later, my sister still wears her hair very short, as she has got one of those very small petite faces that literally would be drowned out and swamped by very long hair. If you think my creative enterprises began and ended with humans in our home, you would be exceedingly wrong. When I was 10, I actually dyed my white cat Purdy blue and our little hamster Bobby boy purple. I was convinced that my cat rather fancied her new look because she began to display a very swanky attitude, and even my mother believed that she had grown exceedingly vain, as if somehow she knew she looked pretty dapper. My father always walked our dogs daily around the local lake near our home that was frequented regularly by dog walkers. On one occasion I had dyed our 2 white toy poodles bright pink, and my father said that he felt like a prize prat and a real effeminate sissy walking bright pink poodles around the lake. He exclaimed that he was getting these odd, horrified looks from strangers who were walking their more macho dogs. My father even got hit on by a local fashion designer who was walking his Pomeranian around the lake at the time. I gather he was tall, lanky and dark, with these dazzling pink, eclectic glass frames, and when he talked, he used this flamboyant, expressive gesture with his arms to express himself. I gather he was so enthralled by our pink poodles and was oohing and aahing over them, saying, "Oh, they're just too sweet! Oh my word, they're just gorgeous!" He then told my father that he had the most fabulous taste and the poodles looked absolutely, totally amazing. He proceeded to give my father his calling card and gave him a huge wink and said, "Call me sometime. It would be cool to meet up." My father, literally freaked out and made a quick, hasty retreat back home, begging me to please get the pink food dye out of my poodle's hair. I don't think I can cope with another walk like that around the lake. I'm getting some very peculiar, strange looks from people, and I'm awfully embarrassed and very humiliated. So more about where I live now. I love Washington and really enjoy living here and would never envisage living anywhere else in the entire world. Growing up as kids, my family would go fishing, golfing, camping and boating, and as the weather is relatively mild here, you can engage in these activities almost all year round. We do tend to get a lot of rain here, with plenty of drizzly days, but on the plus side we have so much gorgeous green scenery as a result. That includes plenty of evergreen trees that never lose their colour throughout the year. In spring we get exquisite pink spring flowers like tulips, daffodils and apple blossom, so during the summers and springs here, Washington is literally ablaze with cheerful, colourful blooms. We also have silvery lakes, rivers and Puget Sound, not to mention statuesque mountains. Our summers can be so gorgeous here, but most people wish they would be longer, and on occasion we do get 90-degree temperatures. Autumn is literally my favourite month of the year because I just adore the golden russet and red hues of the trees at that time of the year before we get all that tree fall. We do have two problems in Washington, traffic congestion and homelessness, but more about the latter later. My Bigfoot story begins when I was running my own hair salon in Seattle, which had become a thriving business for me, with 9 full-time hairdressers working under my belt. At that time of my life, I was married with 2 teenage daughters, Emma and Azalea, who were also beginning to show an eager enthusiasm and intrigue for hairdressing and were increasingly helping me around my salon. One day I decided that given that we had such a huge homeless problem here in Seattle, it would be a rather nice thing to do a before and after makeover for a homeless man off the streets. It was decided that we would book him into a prestigious hotel for a couple of nights so that he could enjoy a good long soak in a hot bath and some delicious warm food. The following day we would take him shopping for some casual smart clothes and we would give him a perfect haircut and a clean-cut shave. Everyone was on board with this fabulous, intriguing idea, not only because it would invariably be an opportunity to show a random act of kindness to a stranger or someone who was down on their luck, but it was also a fabulous promotional opportunity to boot for our up-and-coming hair salon. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I was standing in my hair salon behind the swirling chair of my next client. He was the homeless man receiving our makeover transformation. The young man was about 30 years old and was called Michael, although most people actually called him Mike. He was a amenable, likeable guy whom in appearance alone looked much older than his actual biological age, because if his hard life on the streets is anything to go by, it was hardly surprising. He had long, thick grey beard and long dark hair that he tied back in a very long ponytail, but it was so matted and tangled I had to cut the ponytail off in one swoop. Before long I'd shaved off this man's beard and was in the process of cutting off his hair. Suddenly the homeless man noticed my long bundles of keys lying haphazardly on my dressing counter next to a large bottle of hairspray. He was pointing at my large cuddly keyring of a Bigfoot. "I've seen one of those," he told me, in such a nonchalant way, as if he was discussing a weather report. It gave me the shock of my life when he told me he'd actually seen a Bigfoot, because I adore the hairy critter. My heart started to race. I literally became so incredibly excited. It was like I could hardly breathe for a moment. I've always had such a fascination and intrigue for Bigfoot. So this is Mike's story that he shared with me quite literally that knocked my socks off, and I hope it'll do the same for you. So this is Mike's story. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family with 2 brothers and a very abusive father, who was no stranger to beating us black and blue if we misbehaved at all. For some strange reason, my father despised me the most, and I was singled out for verbal, emotional and physical abuse day in and day out. One day my father throttled me so hard and so violently that I could barely walk as a result. Even my kind, gentle mother persuaded me to just leave, because next time he's going to kill you, she warned me. My mother purchased me a pop-up tent and a sleeping bag and suggested I camp out in the wood for a while. She told me she would leave food parcels out for me and anything else that I might need, and she would leave it behind a particular tree. So for a year I relied on her handouts until one day they finally stopped coming. By this time I joined many of the homeless on the streets of Seattle. There were times I would spend in and out of shelters, and I relied on the help of charitable organisations and the kindness of strangers to give me food. There were some crazy, really barking mad people living out on the streets that had huge mental health problems and behaved in absurd, strange and bizarre ways, and they could be exceedingly violent, aggressive and very dangerous. Then there were, of course, the alcoholics and drug addicts who were addicted to meth and heroin and stuff like that, and they would use these things to numb the pain of their desperate, miserable existence with these artificial stimulants. Then these all are the people who give the homeless a really bad negative reputation, because we're not all like that. Then there were people like me who were down on their luck due to having lost everything, including their jobs, and youngsters like myself who needed to escape the wrath of a parent or an abuse from a foster home. Believe me, there were stories out there that were so crazy they would turn your dark hair grey if I shared them with you. The things that happened out there to people are more creative than the movies themselves, and that I can assure you of. One day when I was sleeping along the long line of tents there was set up against a large building, and it was about 12 at night, I heard the ominous sounds of beer cans rolling across the ground, and I could hear a man shouting, and his voice was very loud and slurred, and I could tell very definitely he was drunk. But of course I was used to all those sounds, because naturally living in conditions like this, you're always aware of the impending dangers, because it can pounce on you when you least expect it, and this was my night to get really, really unlucky. Before I knew it, the zip of my pop-up tent had been opened, and my tent was suddenly infused with a stale smell of cigarette smoke, stale urine and alcohol. Before I knew it, this dithery drunk lunatic was literally pouncing upon me and stabbing me with a knife, and the blood was shooting out of my wounds. I could see the man was so disorientated and groggy, so I kicked him in between his legs, where it really hurts. Even in his inebriated state, he screamed out in agony. I took this moment to push him to one side, and I somehow managed to escape, and spent the next day or so in hospital being bandaged up and treated for my wounds, some of them that were very deep and rather nasty. Naturally, as could be expected, when I did return back to my camping spot, my pop-up tent and worldly possessions had all but been stolen. This happens a lot to the homeless, having our possessions nicked and seized and taken away. And we cannot even sleep at night with our shoes on, because someone rips them off during the night. It's that crazy, it really is. I was jittery and skittish inevitably after being attacked, and so I knew I didn't want to sleep in Seattle that night. I fancied returning to my mother's neck of the woods, to the forest where I camped out when I was 15 years old, to hide from my father. So I made my way back to the area where I grew up, and was lucky to get a lift from a hostel worker whom I knew lived in the area. When I walked past the house where I used to live with my parents, I was horrified to discover that the whole place had burnt to the ground, and I wondered whether my family was actually still alive. Seeing my old family home burnt to a cinder really made me feel overwhelmed and grievously emotional, as you can imagine, because I couldn't even imagine what might have happened to them. I searched the entire area for cardboard boxes. You see, if you're homeless and you've nothing to sleep in, a cardboard box is the next best thing. It protects you from mosquitoes, dirt, and offers you some kind of insulation and a bare minimum of cushioning. I had not been in that wooded area now for over 15 years, and returning to the woods was utterly extraordinary. The trees had grown so much bigger and fuller, and the forest was quite enchanting and alive with the prettiest birdsong. I even observed a couple of Douglas squirrels staring at me curiously with their intriguing brown eyes, and several beautiful white-tailed deers who went scampering past me so hurriedly that they never even observed me. I walked towards the little creek in the woods that I knew very well, and set up camp in close proximity to the water. I had no worldly possessions with me, only my huge cardboard box. I remember realising how crazy I'd been to come out here. I had no money with me, no rifle, no food, no flashlights or matches. I think in my haste and eagerness to leave Seattle, I had overlooked the practical considerations, like the basic necessities of life, as my anxiety about being attacked again quite literally hijacked my common sense. Now I began to realise that I really would need to make a hasty return to Seattle in the morning, because otherwise I could forget about ever eating again or having a hot meal. I was crazy. I don't know what I was thinking. Before long, darkness prevailed over the valley, but I was never more thankful to observe the full moon as I did on that night, along with the scattering of pretty silver stars that lit up the firmament with a soft light that literally dappled the forest so prettily. I was thankful it was a bright night, as it made the distant calls of coyotes and wolves a lot less intimidating and formidable. I decided to get into my cardboard box to get some well-needed shut-eye, and I covered my box with branches and leaves for further insulation and camouflage purposes, although I was aware that without fire and a rifle and my distinct human odour, I might be a magnet for a hungry wolf or a bunch of coyotes, but I refused to engage my mind in such terrifying thoughts that were beyond my control by now. I made sure I just looked like a large discarded box in the woods. It was at about 12 o'clock at night when I was suddenly awoken to find my box being jolted quite vigorously, and I could hear the strange chattering sound that sounded like two people engaging in a gibberish-like language. I became like a nervous wreck, because I had been pounced on before in the middle of the night, so I was feeling incredibly frightened. Suddenly the box I was in was quite literally being pulled apart and torn to shreds. Now my heart was in my chest, and I was literally frozen to the spot in terror. Then I got the fright of my entire life, because I was staring up into the eyes of two big hairy creatures. One was female, and the other must have been her youngling, because although tall, he possessed a very young energy. The creatures were so shocked to see me jump out of the box like that, which I invariably did because I was so startled. I saw that her deep-set treacle-colour eyes literally grew as round as saucers in surprise. I ascertained that she literally believed the box would be great for nesting material purposes, but she had no idea that I was actually in that box. The creatures were about 7 feet tall, with long arms, big shoulders and cone-shaped heads, and they were covered in long, flowing, gorgeous auburn hair. I remember I was so shocked by what I was observing, I just stared at her for what seemed like a very long time, and then it seemed like our eyes locked in a very long gaze. Even the youngster looked gobsmacked to see me, because I doubt he'd ever even observed a human before at such close proximity. He studied me with a very keen fascination, and his eyes travelled up from my feet to my head as if taking in every detail of my appearance. I sensed that he found me a source of great intrigue and curiosity. The critters were not remotely aggressive, but appeared to be somewhat rather perturbed about me, and very befuddled, that I'd been sleeping out here in this box. I think they'd possibly never observed such strange behaviour from a human before, and found this odd peculiarity rather baffling and inexplicable. The creatures then grew a little awkward and uncomfortable in my presence, with the one-on-one interaction with me. I really got the sense that they would rather prefer to keep themselves to themselves, and may have been somewhat self-conscious and diffident. The female nodded at me very briefly, and they were gone so fast, moving like the wind with a seamless grace. It was only after a little contemplation that I suddenly realised that the creatures I encountered were Bigfoot, and I have heard that they've got a bad rap before, as many people believe them to be exceedingly dangerous. But this was not my impression with these creatures. In my case, I sensed a very warm, loving energy from the critters, but also a very strong reluctance to fully engage with humans, because I don't think they entirely trust us. As you can imagine, Mike's story just blew me away, because I could not believe he'd had such an incredible encounter with a Bigfoot. I mean, it just doesn't get better than that. But if you think the story ends here, you would be incredibly wrong, because things took a twist for the Miraculous. Well, at least they did in my book. Once the makeover was complete, I'm not kidding when I say that Mike looked incredible. George Clooney, eat your heart out, because here comes Michael. He really looked like a movie star once he was attired in brand new pair of Levi jeans and a smart The North Face jacket and sweatshirt, not to mention a flashy pair of Neiman Marcus loafers. I'll never forget the way he looked once we had finished and completed the makeover. He kept looking at himself in the mirror in absolute disbelief. He couldn't believe what he looked like. "Is this really me?" he exclaimed. "I thought I had the face of a robber's dog, but you've turned me into a silk purse." I was to discover that Mike had not actually had a bath in 10 long years, and he told me that his bath water was literally covered in brown-looking scales, from all his dead skin cells. He said he really pitied the cleaner clearing away all that nasty bath scum from the tub, because it was absolutely revolting, but that's what living on the streets does. Fast forward a few days, and I'd managed to get Mike living off the streets in a little apartment that one of my wealthy clients said he could use for a few months. One day I had a crazy idea, and I decided to teach Mike to cut hair, but I never imagined what a natural he would actually be. That's what amazed me the most. He took to cutting hair like a duck to water, and furthermore, he seemed to love it, and he was a natural. He also adored complimenting all my female clients, who became so flustered by all his beguiling charm that all the ladies fancied the pants off him. I couldn't help but be bedazzled by his huge physical transformation and his newly acquired confidence that brought out his charming personality that had been subdued and repressed by a hard life living on the streets of Seattle. Before long, women were literally begging for Mike to style their hair, and he even entered competitions where he won all kinds of awards for his innovative styles. He really was quite a remarkable hairdresser. One Monday morning, when the salon was very quiet, I beckoned to a lady to take a seat, as Mike was going to be her stylist that morning. He suddenly realised that he recognised the stranger that was sitting in the seat, and believe it or not, it was his long-lost mother, whom he had not seen for 15 long years. What were the chances of her popping into the salon like that? I watched in tears as Mike literally bawled his eyes out and was hugging the lady and telling her he was so glad that she was alive. The woman looked at Mike quizzically, but then she suddenly recognised him as her son, and they emotionally embraced. It was the most incredible reunion. I was to learn that this sweet mother had actually put out food for her son in the woods for over 15 long years, every single day without exception, and I have a sneaky idea that Bigfoot might have something to do with the missing food parcels that Mike suddenly stopped receiving. It all makes sense now. His sweet mother had written him letters begging him to return home, which he had never ever received. I also learnt that Mike's childhood home was burnt down by his drunken father, who perished in the flames, while the rest of the family managed to escape. Mike was reunited with his two brothers, who were so ecstatic to see their brother again, because they didn't know what had happened to him. Mike is now a hugely successful hairdresser with an awesome, formidable reputation behind him. His life as a homeless man on the streets of Seattle has long since been left behind him. Today he runs his own salon in Seattle, but the story of his encounter with the hairy man he has only ever shared with me, and now with all your listeners. He has also never forgotten what it was like to be homeless, so every year we carry on with the same tradition of giving a homeless person a makeover. So there you are. That's my story. I just want to say that is the most incredible story. What an incredible, incredible story. I don't know what to say. It's just incredible to bring this. It's just this guy off the streets. It's just incredible. I don't know what to say. I'm bedazzled myself. Until next time, goodbye and good night.